I called on one as quick as I could.
So we are responding for a patient who is unresponsive, and our first two arriving units are the two individuals that were on the rescue. They are going to approach the patient. They're going to check for consciousness, breathing, and pulse. If they find that the patient is unconscious, unresponsive, not breathing, and does not have a pulse, they're going to start manual compressions. As they start manual compressions, they are also going to manage the patient's airway, and they are going to put the patient on a monitor to find the underlying rhythm. Second arriving units on scene are going to bring in a medication box, oxygen, and a Lucas device to help with chest compressions. The application of the Lucas device only occurs after 2 rounds or 2 minutes of CPR have occurred manually. Application of the monitor will show the underlying rhythm and determine as to whether or not the patient needs to be defibrillated or have a shock delivered, or if simply medication needs to be administered and compressions continued. Typically, a patient will also need to have their airway managed in some manner, as they will not be breathing. This could be as simple as using a bag valve mask to deliver supplemental oxygen via measured breaths, or it may be as invasive as doing a surgical airway or putting an endotracheal tube in to the patient's airway so that we may better breathe for them. There is no 2 cardiac arrest scenarios that are alike, and therefore, if you were to experience a cardiac arrest where Brunswick Fire provides care, a different set of skills may be performed on each one. After 2 minutes of compressions have been performed, there will be a brief pause for rhythm recognition, and a switching of compressors will occur. If the timing is correct and the patient warrants it, they may also apply the Lucas device during one of these pauses for rhythm checks and pulse checks to minimize interruptions in compressions. It is important for patient outcome and survival that the interruption in compressions are minimal, keeping them to 10 seconds or less at a time. Performing chest compressions is a very physically intense task. Therefore, applying a Lucas device will help provide some physical relief to the providers who may be performing compressions for an hour or more, depending on what is going on with the patient. While the device is being applied, the manual compressor will continue to compress until the machine is applied and the start button is pressed. At that point, the machine will take over compressions and perform continual compressions as long as the battery power lasts. One battery in the unit can last for 45 minutes and may be plugged into auxiliary power to last for as long as there is power connected to that outlet. Having a Lucas device applied and providing compression performs a set amount of compressions per minute at a set depth, set rate, and allows the providers to be able to perform things such as defibrillation without an interruption in compressions. If manual compressions are being performed, it necessitates a pause in compressions in order to deliver a shock so as not to injure the provider delivering the compressions. One of the major advantages of the Lucas device is its ability to perform continuous compressions at the same rate, same depth, and same quality consistently throughout the entire cardiac arrest. The machine does not become fatigued, even if it is being utilized for an hour or more. The machine may be paused for a manual check of a pulse and a verification of the underlying rhythm. One other advantage to the Lucas device is that you may deliver an electrical shock to help restart the patient's heart while the device is running, unlike a manual compressor who would have to remove their hands from the patient while the shock was being delivered in order to not injure the provider. While the Lucas device is running, airway is being managed with a bag valve mask and at the minimum of an oral or a nasal airway. We also have the ability to perform more advanced airways, which would include items like an LMA, a King airway, or an iGel. If needed, we can also perform endotracheal intubation, which inserts a breathing tube into the patient's mouth and into the top part of the breathing tube that would allow us to control their breathing even more. Certain circumstances may require a surgical airway to be placed, in which case a surgical incision would be made and a breathing tube would be placed in order to control the patient's airway. Other things that are being performed as the Lucas device is providing compressions are verification, identification, and monitoring of the patient's underlying rhythm and vital signs. They would also have medications delivered to them via an IV or an IO, meaning either intravenously or interosseously, to help stabilize the patient or provide a greater chance of survival due to the medication administered. We follow all AHA guidelines and ACLS and PALS protocols in the state of Maine under our current operating guidelines. We would continue to perform resuscitation on scene just as would be performed in the hospital, utilizing the same methodologies, same medications, same airway management, and compression the same way they would if the patient was in the hospital. The patient's greatest chance of survival is quick CPR being administered consistently with minimal interruptions and compressions. Moving the patient for transport prior to their heart restarting decreases the patient's favorable outcome. Therefore, we may be performing CPR on scene for an extended amount of time until resuscitation occurs or the patient expires.